Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of classical Athens, right? So we left off in class talking about a lot of really important stuff. We were talking about classical Athens under the age of Pericles, right? And y'all also just took your first quiz. Oh, good Lord, that was a burp. Sorry about that. All right, so yeah, y'all just took your first quiz and things like that. I'll actually get those grades probably uploaded this weekend, and I wanted to go ahead and bang this flip out so it would be available and present and there for y'all early over the weekend. Speaking of. Now, so the thing about it, though, getting into it, okay, y'all are doing a great job. Keep up the good work. But just to give you kind of a schedule of the rest of the stuff going forward into the test, you're going to have one more class with me before your tests, okay? And then after that, all right, what you're going to end up having is like a one last flip going into the test, which I do all the time, okay? It's a very normal thing. Don't freak out. Sometimes you won't have a flip going into the test, which is really great for y'all, but what you need to do this weekend is go ahead and start studying. Working through that study guide, getting after it. I know B period, your test is on Tuesday, and then everybody else starts it on Wednesday and Thursday. So remember also, too, our review period or our review morning that we have that Tuesday morning. Now, some of y'all are going to be like, well, we didn't learn some of this stuff yet, Mr. Terry, going into this review period, blah, 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 blah. Is that true? Yes. But is it going to be okay? Yes. All right. So, and the only things that you'll need to review with me maybe a little bit before you take the test is just the Alexander the Great stuff and the Hellenistic period. But let's not dawdle too much so we can have a nice little shorter flip over the weekend. I know. Seems weird, right? So going into it, though, we left off with talking about the classical period of Athens. And we were mainly talking about the major accomplishments of Pericles, right? The age of Pericles, if you will, is sometimes referred to in the classical period of Athens. But it's that period of growth and prosperity and blooming of Athenian art and intellectualism and philosophy, all right? So speaking of, that is where we're now going to be getting off on our start with blah, 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 blah. What am I trying to say? That is now the direction we're heading in, all right? We're now moving into our birth of Western philosophy, right? We're now getting into the fact that classical Athens saw the birth of Western philosophy under three key people, right? The three big dog philosophers. Now, really quick, before we go anywhere further, a lot of y'all just probably don't understand what philosophy is, right? Well, the thing about it is if you take the word philosopher means lover of wisdom, okay? Now, something that we need to understand that's really important about ancient Greeks is we talked a lot about their use of myths, right? And their use of their religion and the gods and the goddesses and their literature and things like that. Well, remember, there's something important to kind of diagnose about the Greeks, and it's the fact that early on, they didn't really know a lot scientifically. They didn't really know a lot of things scientifically or observationally. They didn't really know why the sun rose and set. They just said a god pulled a fiery ball across the sky, and that must be what it is. But remember, over time, especially getting into the classical period, this is going to change, right? This is going to change because you're going to have the growth of more intellectual people. You're going to have people that actually understand how to diagram things scientifically, how to better understand stuff, how to get to know content on a deeper level. And they're going to question society a lot. And those people were referred to as your philosophers, right? Your lovers of wisdom. They wanted to find out the truth behind everything rather than the mythological context, right? And our very first philosophers are going to start turning away from those myths, right? All the philosophers begin to turn away from those myths, and they try to use logic to explain the world around them. Why does this do that? What's the perfect type of relationship? What is the best way to live life? Is there a life after death? I don't know. So actually trying to figure these different things out and asking a lot of questions. And speaking of questions, there is no better question asker than the very first guy that is your Western. Whoa, what are we doing over there? Why are we jumping all around? What? Okay, we're going to do this real quick. Hold on. Let me jump back real quick. Where's the blue dot at? There we go. And then we're going to get caught right back up. Oh, wait, that's all Persian War stuff. Let's try that again. So, again, to introduce somebody very important, we're going to be talking about the very first philosopher in all of them, all the big three, and his name is that of Socrates. And nobody asked a question better than your boy Socrates, right? So the big thing about that we need to understand about Socrates is he's considered the father of Western philosophy. He is considered your very first philosopher in general. Now, something important to understand as well, a lot of people always ask me, well, Mr. Terry, we're talking about three of them. Are there tons of other ones? Yes, actually, after the beginning of Socrates and the birth of his ideas of academia and the birth of his idea of questioning and understanding the world around him and stuff like that, he's actually going to have students, and those students are going to go off and teach other students, and then you're going to see an exponential growth of philosophers going in through ancient Greece and then even continuing into ancient Rome, okay? So this ball gets rolling, though, from a guy that we actually don't know a lot about his past life. Now, we think that when he was born to like moderate means. We think that mainly he was probably like middle class. We think his mom was like a midwife. We think his dad was a sculptor. But the thing about it, we think he might have been a soldier at one point, might have been one of those hoplites. We're not really positive. But one thing we do know about him is he lived a very, very starving artist type of life, right? Like in the grand scheme of things, he was like poor by conventional standards, mostly due to the fact that literally when he began to analyze the world around him and try to answer questions like, is there a difference between good and evil? Is there anything like, what is the best type of society? How should we better run all of our things? He actually asked all of these questions and taught everything that he figured out for free. So the funny thing about it is he actually was a man of very simple means. So he appeared to be very, very poor. And also this other really interesting thing about Socrates is he wrote absolutely nothing down. He wrote nothing down whatsoever. The only stuff that we know about Socrates is actually stuff that his students wrote down, particularly one of them, Plato, which we'll talk about next. He taught for free in the Agora, though, and he began to really question the world the Greeks were living in. And the funny little thing about it is he hated and loathed the idea of democracy, right? Loathed the idea of democracy. He thought that the Athenian idea of democracy is that it's just we're giving a lot of people that don't know anything the right to dictate our society. And basically to him, he's like, why would we ever do this? Why would we ever give the masses who are uneducated the ability to vote and decide things? Because what if they all decide to go to war, jump off a bridge? Are we all going to do it? I don't think so. So a big thing that Socrates propagates is the idea of intelligence and the idea of like philosophers being a regular thing and coming up in the world and actually spreading their wealth and intelligence. And one day, people were asking him, they were like, oh, you must be the smartest man in the world. And Socrates was like, no, I can't be the smartest man in the world. There's no way that's possible. I'm just a questioner. I just ask a lot of questions, right? I ask a lot of questions and I demonstrate to the fact that we don't really truly know anything, that we all, that human beings have a thirst for knowledge. I'm just demonstrating that thirst. But then he literally starts going around and starts talking to a bunch of government officials, like to different archons and things like that, to different elected officials of Athens. And he starts asking them questions. Right? He starts asking them questions like, well, what do you think about this? Do you think everyone should vote? Why do you think everyone should vote? What's the process behind this entire thing? How do you make sure that we're not being led astray by dumb people or fanatic ideas? And the thing is that a lot of these elected officials didn't know how to respond to him. So he literally created a new method, right? The Socratic method. The Socratic method is literally the idea about asking questions to actually expose people's true ignorance, right? To demonstrate that they actually don't really know anything beyond a shadow of a doubt, and they don't really know anything like really in a deep, deep context. And so he's demonstrating to people that you need to fill that void with information. You need to fill that void with study, with books, with education, and try to make yourself a better person and a more educated and enlightened individual. You even have some types of activities that you do in your classes that is literally named after this man. It's called a Socratic seminar. You could actually argue that every single day in my class is a Socratic seminar because I'm asking you questions. You're responding to my questions. I'm asking you a deeper understanding question to see if you actually know it, right? So to see what you actually truly know on an in-depth level. And Socrates, the man that started the whole process rolling, has one guiding quote that kind of drives the entire thing forward. And he would always say two things. One, he said, an unexamined life is a life not worth living. And basically he's getting at, he's like, we need to understand ourselves. We need to understand everything around us. And we need to know it. We need to stop making up stories about why a guy with a sun chariot is dragging something across the sky. We need to understand it on a deeper level. And the thing about it, though, people would be like, well, what is it then? If it's not a god dragging it, what is it? He was like, well, you know what? I don't know. Because he said, all I know is that I know nothing. But in that essence of not knowing, we can fill that void with intelligence, right? Because it's not supposed to say we're all dumb. It's supposed to say that I don't know anything beyond a shadow of a doubt, but I should seek truth and wherever I can find it, right? And so the thing about it, though, is he's going to start making people really, really upset. Because, he's a guy that's coming in and saying, like, why are we letting dumb people vote? Why are we doing this? Democracy seems like a terrible idea, blah, 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 blah. So they considered him a pest. They called him the gadfly of Athens. I know that little Prezi logo is covering it up, but they referred to him as the gadfly of Athens, right? And what ends up happening in the long run, he is actually arrested, right? He's arrested for two crimes, right? One of them being heresy and the other one being treason, right? And they literally arrest him, and he has a jury of 500 people that put him on trial, and they actually vote to kill him because he's being so annoying, right? The gadfly, he's pestering everybody. A gadfly is a fly that flies around a horse and stuff like that he's constantly trying to shake off. This being actually Socrates being the gadfly, being like, do you know it? Do you know it? Do you know it? Do you know it? And then literally the horse being Athens, right? So the thing about it is over 30 votes his execution is actually voted for. And Socrates is killed by the Athenian government, which is really, really interesting. He actually even also had a chance to escape. One of his friends came up to him and they were like, big guy, I'll get you out of here. We'll get you out of here. We'll run away, right? We'll run away. And you know what he said? He was like, no, man, there's a social contract here. I'm a member of the Athenian society. If I don't die because the jury of my peers voted on it, then what am I really even doing? Like, I'm exposing their inadequacies. I gotta do this, right? And he goes off to die, right? And when he dies, he's not like executed via beheading or anything. He's actually forced to drink poison. And its root, actually, it's a hemlock root is what it's called. It's spelled Hemlock. Hemlock is this stuff that if you boil it in water and drink it, it will kill you. And apparently going into the last phase of his life and like going into his execution, before he drinks that hemlock and stuff like that, he thinks to himself, I do not fear death, because I don't know anything about it, but I'm about to learn, right? Like, so like literally, and he goes into it. And this very famous painting of the death of Socrates is one of my absolute favorites. I'm thinking about printing it out for my classroom and stuff like that, but it's by one of my favorite artists from the 1700s by the name of Jacques-Louis David. So this moment in history is so big that people were painting it thousands of years later. But the next guy we'll talk about is this dude who is somberly sitting at the end of the painting right there. That is no other than Plato, right? So like now, so the big guy that we'll talk about next is the guy that actually wrote all of Socrates' stuff down, and his name is Plato. He was considered the very first true philosopher. Some people are actually considering that. Like as in like he is the student of Socrates, and he takes philosophy to an entirely new game, where he tries to answer those questions that Socrates said that he didn't know anything about, right? So Plato, we also know, though, comes from like more wealthy means, right? He was born pretty wealthy and stuff like that to a very wealthy family, and the thing about it is he ends up going and studying with Socrates for most of his young life. And he wrote 36 books in total. 36 books in total, several of them being dialogues, and one of them famously being called The Republic, right? And in this process of learning from Socrates, the biggest thing he comes down to, he's like, we got to think more, right? We got to think more, and we need to use logic to try and understand the perfect elements of society. Is perfection possible, right? Is a big question that he asks himself. And if perfection is possible, can I get anywhere close to it, right? And he said, know thyself, right? Don't worry about everybody else's opinion. Know why you believe in your opinion, right? Everybody says there's a famous phrase where it's just like opinions are a lot like parts of your body. Everybody's got one, right? Exactly, okay? But he always said, don't follow the crowd. Don't go with the popular opinion. Do you really like the things that you say you like? Or are you liking them because other people like them? And then also look inward, know thyself, and really break that stuff down. And he also used this concept of rationalism to try and understand the perfect forms of things in life, okay? Rationalism is a concept of logic, right? Just using your brain to try and work things out. Not experiments, not observations, but trying to answer unanswerable questions just using the logic you have in your mind. Now, an interesting thing about Plato is he actually believed that there were two universes, right? Okay, now this is really important, okay? Check this out. We're going to talk about it in the warm-up, but he believed that there were two universes. One ideal that is full of the perfect things everywhere, almost like heaven, right? Like he believed in a place called the ideal universe where everything there is perfect, right? There's the perfect version of this phone. There's the perfect version of this coffee cup. There's the perfect version of like a human man. There's the perfect version of a human woman. There's a perfect cat, perfect dog. Well, there is no perfect cat, perfect dog, and his name is Pierre, right? Like, so like he believed that there were these ideal forms of things, and that everything here in the real world is based off that ideal of perfection, and that everything in this real world should try to seek to be as close to perfection as you possibly can get, and it will actually make everybody in society better. We should try to learn how to find the perfect lover, the perfect person, counterpart for ourselves, right? What is beauty, right? He actually connected the idea of beauty to a construct of love, right? He was like, no, beauty is in the eye of the beholder because that person loves this other individual. Beauty will then come naturally, right? It's objective. We believe in it in a sense. It's not all transcendental. It literally is one thing that that person believes in, right? And he believes that we should try to fix society. And a big thing he hated also, just like Socrates, he hates Athenian democracy. He was like, we were letting dumb people rule over us and stuff like that. We should not allow people who get voted in by the masses to rule. He said we should allow the philosophers to lead. Because if the philosopher king is there, he will lead a just society. This will actually come up a little bit later on, too, when we talk about the Renaissance. We'll talk about a guy named Machiavelli, right? Now, another thing about it, though, too, is he opens a massive academy with his wealth and means, a huge school that he actually educates people in Athens with, and anyone he could get his hands on, if you could actually, afford to be there, he would educate you, and he would figure out a way to do it. And he educated so many famous philosophers. I have a painting of the Athenian Academy in the back of my room. Plato's Academy is the setting of a very famous Renaissance piece called The School of Athens by Raphael, right? We'll talk about it a little bit later on, because right here you got Plato standing right there. Actually, Socrates is in this painting too. He's actually right over here bugging somebody or something like that. And then another very, very famous individual by the name of Aristotle is standing right next to Plato right there. But the thing that we'll talk about a lot in class is going to be his theory of forms and this thing that he calls the allegory of the cave. And how, you know what, democracy's pretty much bad because a lot of people like to stay dumb, right? So do me a favor, underneath theory of forms and allegory of the cave, leave about 3 spaces, all right? About 3 spaces, 3 lines, really about 3 lines below there, so we can jot a couple things about it down in class, because I got to draw something, really show it to you. Now, speaking of, though, a couple things, speaking of Aristotle, okay, we're now moving into our third philosopher, a man by the name of Aristotle, right, who apparently was born in Macedonia, son of a doctor, right, a very, very intelligent individual. And his first major career choice is going to be something really important. But he doesn't do it until his 30s. So the thing that you need to understand about it, though, is he actually moves from Macedonia to Athens to join Plato's Academy. And he stays there from the ages of 18 to when he's 36 when Plato dies. And whenever Plato dies and the Academy begins to falter a little bit, Aristotle takes one of the biggest job decisions that anybody has ever heard of. He takes the job of being the tutor to the young Alexander III, the future king of Macedonia, who would later on become Alexander the Great. Right? So exactly, big reason why Alexander the Great becomes the Great, because he was a smart man, tutored by Aristotle, right? He moves to Athens to work with Plato, though, before he becomes the tutor of Alexander, worked inside of his academy, and he realized a big thing. He actually disagreed with Plato on a lot of stuff, right? His guiding ideas, there are too many to count, right? The biggest thing, though, is you have to understand about Aristotle is he studied everything, right? He actually kind of disagreed with Plato about a lot of stuff. He wanted to know the nature of all things, right? So his ideas are so dense and intense, literally we have a hard time kind of penciling them down, right? He studied everything from art to friendship to elements. He created rhetoric styles that you actually have heard of today, known as ethos, logos, and pathos, which is how you should write, right? He said, look, if anybody is writing anything, you need to use ethos, which is like ethics, right? Ethics and the value of soul and ethical value. Logos, which is logic, and pathos, meaning actually empathy, right? And so now look, and also the other bad thing about it is I think his biggest contribution to science and philosophy in general is this concept called empirical study, right? The thing you need to understand about Aristotle is he's different from Plato in one key respect. Plato was we can figure everything out with our brain. No. Aristotle was an empiricist, right? And he believes in empirical study. We only know things we can observe, right? So, for example, he would try to figure out, why does this phone drop to this desk like that, right? Well, he'd be well, there must be some type of force binding it to the earth or something like that, or it's just where it wants to be, is what he would always say. He would also try to quantify animals, right? Quantify animals all the time. Be oh, this one has hair and this and gives birth to live children, so it must be this type, right? And then things like that. And so he kind of leads to the taxonomic system that we actually end up using. And he learns by observing, right? Aristotle's going to be really important. He's going to come up in multiple different units. But the thing about it is this a golden age, right? Well, the thing about it, really quick, Athens in their classical period is considered a golden age. What a golden age is, it's a time period where art, economies, and culture is at an all-time peak. Athens is expanding. They are checking all this boxes, right? They got philosophy popping up. They got 40-foot tall statues of Athena. They got the Parthenon being rebuilt. They got Pericles doing all this stuff. They got theater blowing up. But who is this making mad? It's infuriating none other than the Spartans. And what you're going to see here in about 2 seconds when we get into the flip next period, or when we get into our talk next period in class, you're going to see what's going to happen. And it's going to be a big fight between the Athenians and Spartans. It's going to last decades, and it's called the Peloponnesian War, right? So but we'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.